I've been playing a lot of Monster Train lately, and it's been incredibly fun. It's one of the better new roguelites that I've played, but there are some flaws that might limit its replayability. Also, if you've played Slay the Spire, you'd notice a lot of similarities between these two games, so I have a section at the end of the video where I more directly compare these two games. So let's get into it. So first, what is Monster Train? Monster Train is a deck builder or card game roguelite where you play as various types of monsters and you defend your train against these armies of the winged, aka angels, on your mission to restart the fires of hell. You can play as 5 different clans, each of which have their own unique theme, units, spells, and playstyles. Each clan also has 2 different champions you can pick, which are basically these really strong units that you center your deck around. Between the different clans and their different units and starting cards, there's a good amount of variety and playstyles in the game, and a lot of different game mechanics you can play around with that make the game more enjoyable to play. Each run also has a secondary clan, so you're really combining cards from 2 different clans on each given run. Within the fights themselves, you defend a 4-level train from the attackers. You place units on the bottom 3 levels and fight the enemy troops as they climb up your train and try to destroy your pyre, which you can think of as your final base, your sort of run-wide health. There are a lot of different types of units, and the placement of your troops really matters and will change who gets hit first and what order they attack in. Outside of placing troops, the other main card type is spells, which either directly buff your own units or damage and debuff the enemy units. There's a pretty wide variety of spell types, and you can also combo them with the different units you have. So for example, there are some units that gain health and have increased attack power when they're healed. So those units obviously synergize really nicely with healing spells. And actually, those combos are really important in Monster Train. Of course, all card games use synergies and combos, that's part of the whole point of a card game, right? But compared to other card games, particularly other card game roguelites, the comboing is especially important in Monster Train. Part of what makes Monster Train so fun is that with the right deck, you can create these insane combo chains where you can hyper buff your units, usually your champion, in a way that lets you absolutely destroy the enemy. So for example, on one run that I played, I basically one-shot the final boss because I had built up such an insane deck, such an insane combo. But this also leads to a dynamic where you kind of need to have these insane combos in order to beat the game, especially at higher difficulties. This also means that your whole run can be tossed if you mess up a combo chain. So as one example, your whole run might be based on boosting your champion's attack power and health over the various rounds. So if you happen to misplace your champion and it dies in the first round, your whole run's screwed. There's no coming back from that. Or as another example, if you really need a certain card to start your combo chain, and you just don't get it until the end of the level, that will also hamper your run and might cause you to lose. So while the comboing is incredibly fun, it also lets me giving up on certain runs if I made certain mistakes or didn't have enough card synergies in my deck, which is actually really uncommon for me because I usually play my bad runs to the end in whatever roguelite that I play. But between the fights, it's when a lot of the meta level strategy happens. That's when you get more cards, more upgrades, and more artifacts, which are basically different buffs that you keep throughout your run. This is also where you run across different merchants, let you upgrade your units and spells, or buy artifacts for gold, and there are occasional special events that give you unique cards and unique artifacts. These out-of-combat elements are nice, and they work really fluidly in Monster Train. They don't feel particularly unique to Monster Train, but they work pretty nicely. There also is a pretty good amount of variety and possibilities with how you can upgrade your spells and how you can upgrade your units. And the last main thing that I'll say about the gameplay is that there are a couple extra game modes outside of the base normal game mode. There's a PvP game mode, you can play against your friends or random people. And in this game mode, you fight through the same gate seed, which means that you have the same starting clan, same starting cards, and you'll find the same rewards, same enemies, etc. throughout your run. In addition to the PvP game mode, there's also a daily challenge run and custom runs and challenges developed by the community that you can play if you want to. You can also give yourself some fun challenges and buffs with different mutators in the game, which basically modify your game in various ways, such as lowering how many cards you can draw on each turn or giving all of your units an extra upgrade slot. One other important thing to note is the developers have been adding new large updates to the game completely for free. So for example, the exiled champions, which are the second champion you can play as for each clan, each faction, were added in a recent free update to the game, I think last month. This is a really important aspect of Monster Train that should give it more staying power, more replayability into the future. And along those same lines, official mod support is coming next week for those that are interested in that. As always, I like to talk about RNG or randomness in roguelites because it's such a core part of the roguelite genre. So RNG in Monster Train, something that I thought originally was not very important on my first playthroughs, but I've really changed my mind on that as I played more. The randomness in Monster Train comes in a couple broad forms. So you have the rewards, upgrades, and events you come across, you have the types of enemies that you face, and you have the cards that you draw on a given turn. So at lower levels, you can really kind of build whatever type of deck you want, and most rewards, cards, synergies, etc. can get you a win. You also always have a choice of different cards or relics or whatever reward it is. You can always choose not to take a card or relic if you don't want to, if it doesn't work with your deck, with what you're trying to do. But the extreme combos of Monster Train make card synergy even more important than other deck builder roguelites, especially as you climb the Covenant levels or if you want to use certain kind of combos or synergies. For example, if you're running a full Frostbite deck, which is a deck with a certain type of condition damage, getting the Frostbite relic that really increases your Frostbite damage is going to help you an insane amount. So because of that, your run can kind of be determined, can be made or broke, depending on whether you get that relic, whether you find that on your run. Along similar lines, what cards you draw on each turn will greatly affect your given fight and therefore your run. Though that RNG is kind of modifiable to some degree, if you don't want as much RNG and what cards you're drawing, get a smaller deck, purge some of your cards. But still, your draw order and which cards you draw win will greatly affect your ability to start whatever combo chain you need. As I said earlier, if you need a card to start your combo chain and you don't get it until the last round, that's not going to end well for you. Also, there are these special events you encounter as you're playing Monster Train, but some of them are just better than others. So for example, one special event gives you the equivalent of an extra boss artifact, while other ones kind of give you an okay card. And while the enemies, the monsters, and the bosses you come across are randomized, it does tell you at the beginning of each run what your main bosses will be, and you can see the enemy types in each encounter before you start it. And that can be really helpful to plan around if there's certain enemy types that counter you really hard, or if you need to play your cards differently in order to manage them. So overall, Monster Train does have a pretty sizable amount of RNG. A lot of it just adds some good flavor, some good variety. You can't run the same deck every time. You don't come across the exact same enemies every single run. But because of how much the game relies on getting insane synergies to win, especially at higher difficulties, it also means that your run can be determined by whether you had a chance to get certain cards, upgrades, or artifacts that you need to really have those right synergies for your run. In my roguelite reviews, I like to talk about two forms of progression that add a lot of replayability to the games. The first is horizontal progression, which is progression that adds replayability without changing the difficulty of the game. And the other is vertical progression, which is progression that does change the difficulty of the game in some way, whether by making it easier or making it harder. The main form of horizontal progression for me in Monster Train was unlocking and trying out these different clans, different champions, different clan combinations in order to try out new playstyles and try out new cards and mechanics. The game also keeps track of which clan combinations you've won games with and what the highest difficulty you got those clears on was. I really enjoyed all the different clans, even though I'm way better at some of them than others. I think the game brings a number of truly distinct playstyles, but I will say that some clans combo with other clans much better than others. So for example, the Melting Remnants champion and units really don't combo with a lot of other clans, whereas on the other hand, I found the Awoken to combo with pretty much every single clan there is. You also can unlock new cards and new artifacts for each clan as you play them, and you must level up each clan a little bit before getting access to their second champion. So there is a form of horizontal progression there as well, outside the different clans and champions that you have, but also the different game modes I talked about earlier. So you can play a PvP score race game mode, daily runs of special challenges, or you can play or create these special community challenges. You can also add mutators to your run, which can give you a range of customizable buffs, challenges, or just new mechanics to the game. I didn't really use these features a lot myself, but I think they're great if you're sort of bored of the base game and want some more replayability in that way. In terms of vertical progression, which is progression that does change the difficulty of the game in some form, there's one type that dominates Monster Train, and that's the Covenant levels. So once you get a full clear, you can start climbing the difficulty levels, which in the game are called Covenant levels. Each Covenant level adds a new twist. So for example, the first Covenant rank gives enemies more health and more damage, while the second one adds an unplayable card to your deck. There are a few that are more neutral. So for example, Covenant rank 6 gives you just more starter cards, but progressing up the Covenant ranks generally gets harder and harder and can add a lot of replayability, give you a challenge to try to get as high as you can. There are 25 ranks total, and on my run so far, I've gotten a little bit past rank 10. There's also a soft form of vertical progression within each run. So before each non-boss fight or normal enemy encounter, you can choose to add an extra challenge to get an extra reward. So for example, the challenge might be giving your enemies more damage for the fight, but in return, you get a random artifact if you beat them. You kind of have to take some of these challenges in order to progress or to win sometimes, but it also adds a nice risk-reward mechanic as well that can make your playthrough have more strategic choices. Do I want to risk dying here for a better reward, or do I want to have a safer clear now with the trade-off of a harder final boss fight? The one type of vertical progression that is mostly absent is progression that makes the game easier. You could argue that unlocking different clans make it easier, or that unlocking certain cards makes it easier because those clans or cards are better than others, but there is no permanent account-wide buff that you unlock. You can unlock all the clans and cards pretty quickly. So as a whole, I think Monster Train has a good amount of progression and replayability. The different clans and combinations add a lot of different playstyles, a lot of variety to try, and the Covenant ranks add a nice progressive difficulty that are a fun challenge to climb up if you do want a challenge in your gameplay. So how is the narrative and story at Monster Train? It's pretty par for the course for roguelites. which is to say that there are some story, there are some narrative elements, but they're very limited. You are monsters from hell on a train with the express goal of returning fire to hell that has been frozen over by the winged, aka the angels. In the same vein, there are some limited text lines from the winged invaders, and you can run across these special events that give a little more life to the world around you. So the narrative elements do make the world feel more alive, they do sort of add some lore there, but it's very limited, and it's definitely not a roguelite like Hades or Griftlands that you might check out for the story. Slay the Spire is the most popular card game roguelite, and it has a lot of similarities to Monster Train. They are obviously both card game roguelites, both deck builders, and they have a lot of similar mechanics. So in both games, you get cards in very similar ways, they have a similar style of climbing up difficulty ranks, and certain game mechanics in Monster Train such as artifacts and the special events feel very similar to Slay the Spire. But there are also very important differences between them. So Monster Train has a unit or troop component, while Slay the Spire you only play as your starting character. This really changes the gameplay, because choosing which units to place where and when is incredibly important in Monster Train, but non-existent in Slay the Spire. Though actually, maybe a summoner class for Slay the Spire would be interesting, but as of right now, there's really no equivalent in Slay the Spire. There's no unit mechanic. The card upgrades in different games also take very different forms, and upgrades are much more limited in Slay the Spire. In Monster Train, there's a lot more flexibility in how you upgrade your units, how you upgrade your spells, and I would also argue that the upgrades in Monster Train are much more important for winning the game, whereas you can beat Slay the Spire with few, if any, upgrades. Slay the Spire does feel more balanced as a whole. As I've said so many times, in Monster Train, the name of the game is really getting these absurd combos to win, especially at the higher Covenant levels. And while there's obviously comboing, there's obviously synergies in Slay the Spire, it doesn't feel as combo-y, for lack of a better word. It doesn't rely on that. And you really need to have a balanced deck in Slay the Spire to actually win the game, especially if you want to go for the true final boss. Overall, I suspect fans of one game will also enjoy the other, because there's so much overlap between them. I think the overall balance of gameplay in Slay the Spire is part of what's given it so much longevity for me, and I would still consider Slay the Spire to be the better game between the two of them. However, I do think Monster Train brings some new mechanics and some elements that Slay the Spire lacks. If you really want that unit focus, or if you really want to do those crazy combos, you'll see more of that in Monster Train than you will in Slay the Spire. So is Monster Train worth getting? If you've enjoyed card game roguelites like Slay the Spire, I would say definitely yes. It's a fun card game roguelite that allows for a lot of different play styles, and exploring the different clans and champions is just really fun. As I've said way too many times in this review, the game really shines when you create these wild, these insane combos, and it's just really fun to do that. However, because of that, it's not the most balanced game, which means that higher difficulty levels especially, there's a smaller number of viable playstyles that I would like, and RNG or randomness plays a larger role than I wanted. Still, I picked up Monster Train at full price, and I definitely feel like I've got my money's worth. Please like this video to help me out if you found it enjoyable or informative, and I'll link some more roguelite reviews of mine in the description down below. Thanks for watching.